It's 2 a.m. on October 19th, 1998, and a man nicknamed Avalon, a wilderness guide, environmental educator, and a lover of nature, is about to burn down a ski resort. He and his co-saboteur Country Girl drive through a snowstorm up winding switchbacks to the ridgeline of the Vail ski resort in Colorado. Their truck briefly stalls along the snow-covered slope, but soon they make it to their first stop, the nook where they stashed the fuel canisters the day before. On top of the mountain, snow blankets the peaks. All is quiet. As dawn approaches, Country Girl drops Avalon off at the ridgeline, then makes her way down the mountain to a nearby park for a quick getaway. Meanwhile, Avalon gets to work. He scoops up the incendiary devices and jogs his way along the mountain. Peeking his head into each structure to make sure no one is inside, Avalon sets fire to a ski lift, then a lodge, then a cafe, then another ski lift. By the time he finishes his route, 8 buildings are alight with flames, stark against the night sky. 1 building fewer than planned because Avalon found 2 hunters sleeping in one of the cabins slated for the burn. But now the fires rage, and Avalon needs to make his escape. But before he does, he sneaks a quick look back at the sun peeking over the Colorado Rockies, admiring his work. An inferno reducing the wealthy ski resort of Vail to ashes.
Vail residents awoke to shocking news Monday. Fire atop Vail Mountain had caused $12 million in damages.
The nation's busiest ski resort was hit today by a fire.
The mysterious and elusive Earth Liberation Front had struck again. That fire on those mountain peaks in 1998 was the environmental group's biggest hit yet. But it certainly wasn't its last. Those fires that rocked the Vail community and national media were signals to the industry, to the United States, and to the world. The Earth Liberation Front was here and was ready to wage war against corporate extraction. Avalon, however, would come to witness another firestorm that began long before he set that first milk jug of fuel off under the Vail ski lift and would last far longer. He would witness one of the biggest series of property damage incidents in recent US history, and he would experience the subsequent crackdown on those responsible. Avalon and Country Girl didn't know it yet, but the Earth Liberation Front would be turned by the US government and media into a specter of ecological radicalism for the American public. Industries destroyed, hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure reduced to ashes, bonds shattered, trust betrayed, and even a life taken. This is the story of the Earth Liberation Front.
Ecological terror.
America's most serious domestic terrorist threat.
Radical eco-terrorist group, Earth Liberation Front.
The ELF.
Before we get into the video, I have an important message about some future content, and I want to ask for your support. If you don't have the financial means right now, no worries, click ahead to this time code for the important message and to watch the rest of the video. But if you do have the means, I'll give it to you straight. These days, our changing climate sponsorships and ad revenue aren't what they used to be, and things are on a financial downtrend for the channel. Nothing dramatic will happen to the channel just yet, but right now, the majority of the channel's revenue, some 2/3 of it, comes from in-video sponsorships and YouTube ad revenue. And those are slipping. And as I dive into more controversial topics like the one this series is about, the threat of demonetization only makes things worse. This means that I'm at the whims of whatever other companies want to pay, and to a lesser extent, see. So this is where you come in. The last third of my revenue comes from the backbone of this channel, our Changing Climate's Patreon supporters. Over 700 of you pledge to back OCC month in and month out, and that support is the sole reason I'm able to take big risks like making this 3-part series on the Earth Liberation Front. Sadly though, Patreon support hasn't been enough to sustain this channel. To pull back the curtain a bit, it is just me, Charlie, working to bring you all this eco-socialist content for free every month. This series alone took 6 months of work, and I did that work with no prospect of getting paid or even the video doing well. I just wanted to put out high quality and engaging stories that examine the climate crisis, capitalist destruction, and what we can do about it. And crucially, I want the videos that I make to be free and accessible to everyone. Unfortunately though, I have to pay my rent, healthcare costs, and the remarkably extreme prices of 3D models and assets. Looking towards the future, I'm hoping to continue making big, high-quality series like this one, but if I'm not able to make the finances work, I might need to reassess. So if you have the means to keep this channel afloat, literally just a quarter of the cost of one movie ticket a month, I humbly ask you to support this channel on Patreon. and I want to make becoming a channel supporter a mutually beneficial relationship. So when you become a member on Patreon, you'll get access to all my videos, including the next episode in this series 1 month early and ad-free. We also have a lovely little Discord community for talking climate and leftist politics, and there's also a trove of bonus videos and raw interviews as well. If you are still here, thanks so much for watching and understanding, and if you become a Patreon supporter to keep these videos high quality and free for all, you have my endless gratitude. You are truly amazing. And finally, one last thing, the important message. After the third part of this series wraps up, I plan on making a debrief video covering your questions, concerns, critiques, and points of confusion. So if you disagree or are confused about something in this series, please respectfully comment below or on Patreon or through the patron exclusive Discord server. All right, now back to the episode. 3 years before the destruction of the Vail ski resort, environmentalists are under siege in the Cascade Mountain Range at the Warner Creek encampment. The year is 1995. A group of land defenders is dead set on preventing the logging of the 14-acre timber sale in the Willamette National Forest. They've been dug in for 342 days. On the logging road into the forest, land defenders built a barricade complete with a drawbridge over a 15-foot deep trench and stood their ground for almost a year through bitter cold and snow. But on August 16, 1996, the 343rd day of the encampment, the Forest Service cops pushed through the barricade. They toppled tents, tackled and attacked protesters, and dragged 7 environmentalists away in handcuffs. Bulldozers rammed through the makeshift wall, and the logging trucks chugged into the old-growth forest to hack and saw a stand of ancient trees. The almost year-long struggle had come to an end. Defeat had come at last. But from that defeat was born a new form of resistance. It was at the Warner Creek encampment that Bill Rogers, a longtime environmental organizer who went by the pseudonym Avalon to avoid the constant state surveillance of eco-activists in the Pacific Northwest, found comrades. Avalon dug trenches with Country Girl, built bipods with someone who went by the name Seattle, and locked himself to concrete cylinders alongside Donut, a man otherwise known as Jacob Ferguson. In the aftermath of Warner Creek, those on the barricades made their way back to their various homes across the Pacific Northwest. But there was something on the wind. Rumblings of an underground group of eco-saboteurs were making their way to the United States from its alleged birthplace in the UK. The potential of an underground, direct action environmental group sparked hope in the disheartened defenders of Warner Creek. The Earth Liberation Front was about to take root in the communities radicalized by struggle at Warner Creek. And the epicenter of this escalation of tactics was found in Eugene, Oregon. The 1990s, a time when mainstream environmental groups were spinning their wheels on their primary mission: protecting the land and water from extractive industries. In the wake of the landslide of grassroots environmental pressure campaigns throughout the 1970s that pushed a conservative president, Richard Nixon, to establish the Environmental Protection Agency, pass the Clean Air and Water Acts, and the Endangered Species Acts, the environmental movement became increasingly institutionalized and professionalized throughout the 1980s and the 1990s. The Nature Conservancy, the Sierra Club, and the National Resource Defense Council turned from grassroots campaigns to lobby. Mainstream environmentalism turned from action on the streets to voting better and influencing the right politicians. So-called Big Green had formed, and its success was tightly tied to maintaining good relations with corporate leaders and the state. For those directly confronting industry, like at Warner Creek, it seemed as if the organizations that claimed to be on their side were cozying up with the devil. In their minds, getting on the good side of George H.W. Bush or Bill Clinton, who greenlit the Willamette timber sale, was not the answer to protecting ancient stands of forest.
Moderate environmentalism is bureaucratic in nature. The issue, the way I see it, is right here. That's the issue. The issue isn't sitting and cutting deals in smoke-filled rooms.
The major environmental groups are still are reform. They still believe in the system. The mainstream groups, and a lot of times, aren't even saying what I'm saying. It's, you know, their positions are far too moderate. They're willing to give up too much to commercial interests.
For frontline and direct action land defenders, the mainstream green nonprofits were bureaucrats, or, at their worst, traitors. They were bending the knee to the state and corporations. This inevitably bred frustration, as eco-activists across the country witnessed the continued destruction of ecosystems at the hands of corporate greed and the profit motive, while large eco-nonprofits cozied up to the perpetrators of that destruction. This climate was a perfect crucible to forge a more radical and daring underground movement. Indeed, it was decided in 1995 that the Eugene, Oregon-based group Earth First, which had, since the 1980s, spearheaded numerous environmental direct action campaigns in defense of the natural world, should eschew its direct action and monkey-wrenching contingent, a decision that would allow the organization to become more public-facing while leaving the sabotage and property destruction to more clandestine groups. In the background of this transformation, tactics were escalating across the nation, as small-scale monkey-wrenching like gluing locks, smashing windows, and pouring sugar into excavation equipment spread. Individual actors like Ted Kaczynski were planting bombs in mailboxes.
Last 16 years, the Unabomber's attacks have killed 2 men and wounded 23 others.
And in Oregon, anger was rising. The National Forest Service, which is an arm of the Department of Agriculture, was greenlighting loggers to clear-cut old-growth forests into oblivion. The Forest Service job is not to protect trees, but instead to make sure there are enough trees so timber companies can cut them down. And all of this came to a head in Eugene, Oregon in 1997. In the summer of 1997, the people of Eugene were battling for the fate of 40 ancient trees. 40 gnarled, majestic sweet gum, redwoods, big leaf maple, and black walnuts. For hundreds of years, these trees watched over the land that would come to be known as the city of Eugene, breaking up the blue sky with a shower of leaves, dappling the ground below in sunlight. That is until the cybersecurity firm Symantec, famous for its Norton antivirus software, wanted to cut down those trees to build a parking garage. Local environmentalists were immediately outraged. They mounted a pressure campaign to persuade the city council to cancel the project, and a date was set for a tense public hearing meeting on June 2nd, 1997. But as the date drew near, the city announced it would start hacking down the trees one day before. This completely sidestepped the will of the people to appease the newly growing tech industry. So eco-anarchists, earth-firsters, and environmentalists took matters into their own hands. It's 2:30 in the morning on June 1st, 1997, and 11 tree defenders are in the midst of scrambling up the walnuts, the sweet gums, the old trees of Eugene. As one of the protesters, Jim Flynn, explains in the documentary If a Tree Falls,
we just went and did it, hoping that we could stave off the cutting for one day until that public hearing.
The mission was clear. All they had to do was stay in those trees for 24 hours. The 11 activists handcuffed their hands around those trees in high up branches and prepared to weather the storm. And the storm certainly came. The clock ticks to 6 a.m. Riot cops arrive on the scene, gas masks covering their faces, batons in hand, pepper spray, and tear gas on their hips. They immediately get to work protecting the destruction of a historic landscape for the soon-to-be property of Symantec. Tear gas canisters fly into the crowd protesting the tree cutting in the streets below. Police push, drag, and rip people away from the fenced-in lot that is home to the ancient trees, while another group of cops set up the cherry pickers. One by one, the law enforcement agents ascend into the foliage to face down the tree defenders.
The Eugene Police Department seemed hell-bent on removing us from the trees as quickly as possible.
They take out scissors and start cutting the inseam of each tree sitter's pants. Like unfeeling machines of the state, the cops then subject the protesters to chemical torture until they relent. They douse each person in pepper spray all over their body, but especially their crotch, until they relinquish their hold on the old trees. 11 tree defenders soon turn to 7, who soon turn to 3, and then to one last tree sitter. As the cops drag down the protesters, the arborists drag down the redwoods, the black walnuts, and the sweet gums soon after. By mid-morning, only one sweet gum still stood. An editor for the Eugene-based Earth First journal, Jim Flynn, stood strong as the Eugene police relentlessly showered him with pepper spray. Every piece of his body was an inferno of pain. He just had to hold out for the rest of the day. And as the crowd below watched the horrors of state repression above, they started yelling and shouting. The police escalated.
The cops grab a guy off a bike and smash his face into the pavement, and he was not resisting. He repeatedly said, "I'm not resisting," as they twisted his arms behind his back. And that wasn't enough. They had to stand on his head as well and then force the spout of a pepper spray can into his eye and nose and mouth.
Myself and my wife were both maced. I watched children be maced.
8 hours later, Jim Flynn was still defending the sweet gum. The cops had unloaded roughly a dozen pepper spray canisters onto him to get him to budge. And for 8 hours, Flynn bore excruciating pain to save the tree that he now hugged. But the chemical fire that burned white hot all over his skin and eyes reached a tipping point. Jim Flynn had endured enough torture. He finally relented. The cops hauled him down, washed him off, and threw him into jail for sitting in a tree. And as Flynn rode in the back of the police van to the jail, the last sweet gum fell. Paradise could now be paved for a parking lot. For many Eugene environmentalists, this day marked a moment of radicalization. The city ignored a public hearing. Peaceful tree sits were met with chemical torture from agents of the state. The government seemed more interested in protecting the property of a tech corporation than the environments and bodies of the people it supposedly represented. Debates started circulating. Was nonviolent protest enough? For 3 green anarchists named Jacob Ferguson, Sunshine, and Kevin Tubbs, the answer was no. They were fed up with the inaction of the large so-called green nonprofits. They witnessed the clear-cutting of the Willamette Forest that they had tried to protect with the Warner Creek barricade. They had watched as friends and comrades were chemically tortured for sitting in trees. After having exhausted all other tactics, battling the state and corporations on logging roads, streets, and in the courts, after education campaigns fell flat and voting harder led to Bill Clinton, those 3 soon turned towards the ideology and structure of the Earth Liberation Front. Ferguson, Tubbs, and Sunshine would bring fire and wrath down on the logging profiteers that were ripping apart the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. Ferguson and his friends didn't start the Earth Liberation Front. Its origins trace back to England, where a similar catastrophe of warring environmental ideologies and tactics was at play.
When decades of attempts to solve problems through legal means have proven fruitless, are we supposed to continue to work strictly within the law or give up altogether?
Supposedly, the Earth Liberation Front began with a group of individuals who broke away from an Earth First chapter in Brighton, England. But the movement quickly spread around the world, with early ELF attacks in the Netherlands and Germany targeting airports, hunting platforms, and neo-Nazis. Across these disparate actions, the Earth Liberation Front was connected not by bonds of membership or leadership, but through ideology. Because this wasn't your typical organization. The ELF was underground, leaderless, and non-hierarchical.
The ELF is organized into autonomous cells, which operate anonymously and independently from one another and the general public.
That's Craig Rosebraugh, an important figure in this story. But we'll get back to him in a little bit. He goes on to explain that the ELF
contains no hierarchy or central leadership, but instead operates under an ideology. And if an individual believes in that ideology and they follow a certain set of widely published guidelines, he or she can perform actions and become part of the Earth Liberation Front.
Those guidelines reflect the core ideology of the Earth Liberation Front. 3 rules that require all who claim the ELF name to
cause maximum economic damage to a given entity that is profiting off the destruction of the natural environment. To educate the public on the atrocities committed against the environment and life. To take all necessary precautions against harming life.
Melding together philosophies of green anarchism, social ecology, and deep ecology. The ELF wasn't just interested in raising awareness about ecological destruction or voting harder for green champions. Many who formed ELF cells saw capitalism, the profit incentive, or perhaps even civilization as a destructive force, and wanted to directly confront it.
The destruction of life is not a mere random occurrence, but a deliberate act of violence performed by those entities concerned with nothing more than pursuing extreme economic gain at any cost.
The wide array of Earth Liberation Front cells across the world were connected by a belief that one of the most effective ways to slow down industrial extraction is to directly attack corporate profits, not through bargaining or lobbying.
When the state itself causes and profits from the various injustices we struggle against, how is it logical to believe the system will change without being forced?
ELF tactics used property destruction to force the system to change. This meant cells were under increased scrutiny from the police. So to avoid detection from the state, alongside removing the supposed ills of hierarchy, the Earth Liberation Front championed a leaderless model and was highly anonymous. ELF cells never communicated with each other and did not know each other's real identities. This leaderless and mysterious organizational structure meant that even if one ELF group fell into the hands of the state, others could continue untouched. This also meant, as Craig Rosebraugh puts it,
there's no realistic chance of becoming active in an already existing cell. Take initiative, form your own cell, and do what needs to be done to protect all life on this planet.
Sunshine, Jacob Ferguson, and Kevin Tubbs did just that. With the ideological guide and principles in mind, they formed an Earth Liberation Front cell that would soon strike fear in the hearts of the industrial barons of the Pacific Northwest. In the early morning hours of October 28, 1996, a newspaper carrier from the Salem Statesman Journal was working his route in Detroit, Oregon, slinging papers onto the front steps of homes and businesses. All was normal until he passed the Federal Ranger Station on the outskirts of town. There, he saw licks of smoke curling from a forest ranger's truck. In a matter of seconds, the truck burst into flame. The fire department came quickly and quenched the flames. In the aftermath, as they sorted through the ashes, it became clear that this was no accident. On the roof of the station was a milk jug full of a mix of diesel and gasoline. It had failed to ignite, saving the building from disaster, and there was no question as to who was responsible. On the station's wall were scrawled the words, "Earth Liberation Front." Just 2 days later, on October 30th, the Earth Liberation Front struck again. Roughly 130 miles away at a ranger station in the forests outside of Oak Ridge, Oregon, 3 figures dressed in dark clothes, faces covered, pulled up to the dumpster outside the outpost and placed a DIY firebomb inside. Along the eastern wall of the property, they placed a second gas-filled milk jug. Both were set to go off once the incense sticks inside of them burned down. With the firebomb set, the group scattered nails along the driveway to slow down firefighters, swapped the tires of their borrowed Subaru, and made their getaway into the night. This time, both devices did their job, because in the morning, the forest rangers of Oak Ridge Station woke up to find their place of work reduced to ashes. 2 fires, October 28th, October 30th, 1996. The first real actions of the Pacific Northwest ELF cell. Acts of destruction, to be sure. But were these 2 arsons an act of rage, or a strategic escalation of tactics in the long struggle to defend the last remnants of untouched old-growth forests? For Jacob Ferguson, Sunshine, and Kevin Tubbs, it was perhaps a bit of both. All 3 had witnessed and lived through the hard-fought struggle of Warner Creek, had witnessed the Forest Service barrel down the blockade and lay out the red carpet for chainsaws and trucks, and for years had been forced to watch as peaceful blockades were violently broken apart by local police and Forest Service agents in the name of a logging agency that was rapidly leveling surrounding ecosystems. For these 3, it was time to change their tactics. It seemed to this trio that the only thing that the capitalist state and the barons of industry would pay attention to would be a direct hit to their bottom line. So Ferguson, Tubbs, and Sunshine filled up some old plastic milk jugs with a mixture of gasoline and diesel, wedged a sponge into the handle with some incense, and drove to the ranger station, claiming the destruction in the name of the Earth Liberation Front. And with those 2 actions, they ignited a spark that would burn white hot in the coming years. 9 months later, in late July of 1997, Craig Rosebraugh walks into his local post office in Portland, Oregon. A longtime animal rights activist in the Portland scene, Rosebraugh, together with 6 other organizers, formed the Liberation Collective a year earlier in 1996. An organization that sought to connect larger social justice issues with the animal liberation struggle, the Liberation Collective soon became a clearing ground for messages from the direct action group, the Animal Liberation Front. So as Rosebraugh gathered letters out of the Liberation Collective's mailbox on that hot July day, he wasn't surprised when he noticed a strange-looking note amongst the stack of envelopes. The handwriting of the address was purposefully distorted, and there was no return address. Cautiously, Rosebraugh ripped open the envelope flap, and inside he found a communique from the ALF and the cheekily named Equine Zebra Liberation Network, or EZLN, a nod to the Zapatistas, who are also known by the same acronym. The letter was clear. the ALF and the EZLN were claiming responsibility for a recent attack on the Cavel West horse rendering plant in Redmond, Oregon, a few days before. Under the light of the full moon, Jacob Ferguson, Kevin Tubbs, and a fellow organizer, Seattle, who was also at the Warner Creek encampment, alongside one other, sneak onto the grounds of the Cavel West horse rendering facility. It's July 21st, 1997. A few days before, the Associated Press published an article revealing that 90% of the wild horses rounded up by the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program ended up in slaughterhouses. And one of those slaughterhouses was the Cavel West facility. Outraged by the article, Ferguson, together with Seattle and two others, lugged 35 gallons of a mixture of soap and petroleum to Redmond, Oregon. Their goal is to end Cavel West's ability to profit from slaughtering wild horses. Night has arrived and Tubbs sits in the car manning the police scanner, keeping the engine warm for the getaway. Seattle, meanwhile, drills a series of large holes in the walls of the slaughterhouse office, making sure to wait for the loud hum from the coolers to kick on to mask the noise of drilling. After he finishes, the rest of the team fills those holes with a highly flammable fuel mix, while Seattle moves on to the building housing the refrigeration unit to again prep holes for the fuel. In a matter of minutes, the holes are full of fuel and the team places electrically timed lighters in them, ready to burn the entire place to the ground. On their way out, the group checks to make sure no one is inside the buildings. They place the remaining 10 gallons of fluid into the storage shed and pour 2 gallons of highly corrosive muriatic acid into the air conditioning vents. The job is almost finished. Seattle just has to connect the batteries to the electrical timers. A risky job, as one errant spark could set the whole building alight early. He connects the first incendiary device. Success. He moves over to the second device, and as Seattle shifts the battery towards the ignition, a spark jumps the gap. The building erupts in flames. The group needs to leave immediately or risk dying. They stream off the property, shed their clothing into a hole, pour the rest of the acid onto the heap of their shirts and pants, and covered in dirt. In just a few minutes, they pile into the getaway car, and Tubbs slams on the gas. The next day, Cavel West is ash and burnt timber. That single action dealt at least $1 million in damages. Cavel West was never again able to rebuild. And with this victory, members that would soon become a notorious ELF cell would send a communique to the Liberation Collective, claiming responsibility under the more well-known acronyms of ALF and EZLN, a letter that Craig Rosebraugh would open in the middle of a post office in Portland. Overnight, the group stopped what so many had tried and failed to stop for years. But this escalation of tactics into industrial sabotage wasn't just contained to Oregon. By the latter half of 1997, Earth Liberation Front cells and actions were emerging across the country, and Craig Rosebraugh, alongside his fellow organizer Leslie Pickering, were fielding communiques from across the nation. The powder keg would explode on October 19, 1998, in Vail, Colorado. After setting 8 buildings alight, Avalon makes his escape. Locating a hiking trail, he tears off down the mountain. But in the dark, rocky terrain, Avalon badly twists his ankle, slowing down his descent. He soldiers on, though, desperately looking for the right trail. He finally finds the bike path he's been looking for, limps down it, and makes it all the way to the park where Country Girl sits in the car. They immediately take off down the road, and on the radio, they start to hear reports about the fire on the mountain.
Fire atop Vail Mountain.
Fires across the Vail Mountain ski resort to protest its expansion.
As the smoke cleared at Vail, the ELF had dealt $12 million in damages, and a communique landed in Craig Rosebraugh's inbox. The arson was committed on behalf of the Lynx. The communique warned that putting profits ahead of Colorado's wildlife would not be tolerated. This action is just a warning. 2 years before the fire, in August of 1996, the U.S. Forest Service approved an expansion of Vail south of the resort's ski area. The expansion would encroach on one of the last roadless regions in the heavily developed area, a region which was a known habitat for marten, boreal owl, golden-crowned kinglet, and perhaps most importantly, one of the last remaining habitats for the Canadian lynx, which had been seen in the area just 4 years before. In the wake of that decision, a coalition of environmental groups like the Sierra Club, the Colorado Wildlife Foundation, the Colorado Environmental Coalition, and others submitted an official request that the expansion decision be overturned. Indeed, the expansion was so unpopular that by 1997, the US Forest Service citizens' comments were 80-1 opposing the expansion. Legal battles ensued. But in October of 1998, the federal court once again greenlit the expansion. The construction was slated to break ground on October 19th. That is, until the Earth Liberation Front struck that very morning. The Vail fire would open the floodgates for a countrywide uptick in ELF arsons and actions. And with that pressure on extraction capitalists and private property came increased media scrutiny.
They call themselves eco-terrorists.
A radical new terrorist group is operating in our area.
There are terrorists carrying on business as usual right here at home.
The actions of the Earth Liberation Front were denounced and the group was labeled terrorists.
One of the most dangerous and mysterious groups in the country.
And while the Earth Liberation Front, which had yet to kill or injure a single person, was being labeled terrorist, the US was continuing its long history of terrorism throughout the imperial periphery.
It was the CIA that armed the terrorists.
B-52 bombers fired cruise missiles deep into Iraq.
This frustration with globalization, with US imperialist intervention, would boil over at the World Trade Organization conference in 1999.
Well, it's Seattle, a west coast US port. What these protesters are saying is that while there's globalization, world trade is expanding around the world. That's happening without due regard to the environment and without due regard to the poor.
Mass protests against the World Trade Organization erupted on the streets of Seattle, where the conference was located, and the police came down hard on those in the street. Curfews, tear gas, rubber bullets, pepper spray, and beatings pushed some into more aggressive means of defense. The battle in Seattle had begun. It's there on the streets of Seattle that we meet Daniel McGowan. Frustrated with the imperialist politics of the US and the violent tactics of the Seattle police, McGowan donned his darkest clothes and fought back.
I was, involved in the Black Bloc part of the protest. We got attacked by undercover cops and people were accused of fighting back.
From his hometown of Rockaway in Queens, New York, McGowan initially moved to California to protect old-growth forests. He had been active in the Pacific Northwest radical environmental scene for a couple of years, but the police repression on the streets of Seattle during the World Trade Organization protests was the final straw. In the aftermath of the WTO protest, McGowan moved to Eugene, Oregon.
To get involved with the Earth First Journal and also meet up with some of the people that I was hanging out in Seattle, who I had a feeling were interested in bringing me in to something.
It was in Eugene that McGowan connected with the Earth Liberation Front. The Pacific Northwest ELF cell was growing, and they wanted McGowan to be a part of it. McGowan was no stranger to direct action tactics. He had a history of GMO crop destruction across California and Oregon.
I had engaged in a lot of sabotage actions at that point, 20 or something like that. Maybe 15.
The ELF would mark an escalation in tactics for McGowan, but as he joined up with a few of his other comrades he met in Seattle, he was ready to do more than just pull up GMO crops. As McGowan considered whether to escalate his tactics, a broader conversation emerged both within environmental circles in hotspots like Eugene and the national media about whether the ELF was effective in their goals. The ELF was a shock to a movement that had long viewed itself as rooted in non-violent ideologies. Was property destruction a necessary, useful, or even strategic escalation of tactics? 19 years later, human ecologist Andreas Malm grapples with this question in his provocatively titled book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Throughout, he digs down into the root of why property destruction is such a disparaged tactic on the environmental left.
Our entire capitalist culture and bourgeois civilization are built around the idea that private property is sacred. I mean, in the US in particular, it's the most sacred thing there is.
When examining whether economic sabotage, and more specifically property destruction, is quote-unquote good or bad, or even just an effective tactic, the context in which that destruction takes place is crucial. For Malm, climate change is violence. So destroying the property of a fossil fuel industry that causes tens of thousands of climate change-related deaths for each pipeline and refinery they construct, perhaps is a justified tactic. Regarding a newly constructed pipeline by French fossil fuel giant Total Energies, Malm calculated that it would
kill nearly 8,000 people every year. And that's only the deaths caused by heat. So not the floods, not the hurricanes, not the drought, the food supply shocks.
But it's crucial to note that destruction and sabotage are not proposed as the answer to these problems. Instead, they are obstacles to slow down the momentum of a train barreling off a cliff.
No, violence is never the answer, as in the solution to something. But violence, certain types of violence, if you define property destruction as a type of violence, can be necessary to break down the inertia and the resistance of a deeply entrenched order and all the power interests that come together, come with it. And the scale of the transformation of our society that we need. I mean, changes of this proportion, I think, have never in history been accomplished without confrontation.
Property destruction, then, could be perhaps best understood as a useful delay tactic for a much broader movement, one that wields countless other tools in a diverse toolbox. Almost every movement for social change, whether the suffragettes, the US civil rights movement, or the South African anti-apartheid movement, has been accompanied by militant wings that went beyond nonviolent civil disobedience. The history of those struggles suggests that without militant escalation, those more peaceful movements would have been less effective. Take the civil rights movement, for example. While Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. staged sit-ins and marches, Malcolm X and later the Black Panthers took up arms to defend themselves from the police and white supremacists. Indeed, Dr. King himself even had an armed escort at times. To white America, the perceived militancy of Malcolm X's black nationalism made Dr. King's nonviolence seem more appealing. Indeed, Malcolm X explained this tactic to Coretta Scott King.
Malcolm X leaned over and said to me, Mrs. King, I want you to tell your husband that I didn't come to Selma to make his job more difficult. But I thought that if the white people understood what the alternative was, that they would be more inclined to listen to your husband.
This is known as the radical flank effect, a phenomenon that occurs when a more militant wing pushes the public towards accepting the main movement. Whether it was suffragettes smashing windows to drive men towards the negotiating table, or Black Panthers defending the streets with guns, making sit-ins look more reasonable, academics have argued that escalating towards radical tactics has led to increased support of the more mainstream movement. The ELF can at best be seen in this light, as a radical flank that made tree sits and logging blockades seem tame, and therefore more acceptable. But when it comes to the tactic of property destruction, at the end of the day, it's a question of politics. For Craig Rosebraugh, the violence of industry far outweighs the destruction of a ski resort.
You see the fire, I take it, as a completely legitimate target. I do. And the use of arson against that program as justified. I do.
For those who fought back against police brutality and globalization in the streets of Seattle in 1999, property destruction is justified. As Kurdish revolutionary leader Abdullah Öcalan argues, these acts of destruction are like a rose growing thorns to defend its beauty. For those deeply embedded in capitalism and the sacredness of American property, however, such acts are horrid.
Vandalism is vandalism. Destruction is destruction, whether it's of lives or property. It's not acceptable.
This, however, cleanses history of the many acts of property destruction taken in parallel with nonviolent movements for justice. Because capitalism demands the deification of property and, to a broader extent, profit, the effectiveness of radical flanks and more radical tactics like property damage are often brushed over in mainstream histories of social progress.
A comrade in some conversation called this peace washing.
In a follow-up to that woman's response to vandalism at the WTO protests, we can see this peace washing at play in American history.
What do you think of the Boston Tea Party?
I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you.
So then the question of whether the property destruction of the ELF is justified seems to be a matter of politics. For the owners of those businesses and some of those who relied on logging or skiing to put food on the table, this was terrorism, plain and simple. But for the members of the growing ELF cell in the Pacific Northwest, after the failures of the mainstream environmentalist movement, it seemed that there were no other options to prevent environmental disasters that could affect the entire globe except to meet power with power. Back in the Pacific Northwest, Daniel McGowan linked up with Jacob Ferguson and other new members of the ELF cell like Suzanne Savoy in the winter of 2000. The cell was growing as their actions gained more attention. Steeped in his environmental work at the Earth First Journal, McGowan was ready to strike back at old-growth logging companies. Company trucks full of the corpses of redwoods passed by McGowan during his commute in Eugene, and one of those timber corporations was Superior Lumber. In McGowan's own words on the Green and Red podcast, Superior Lumber was
logging hard-to-find spots.
Their target was set, but they needed to come up with a plan. To avoid the ever-present surveillance of local police and federal agents, Avalon, together with Ferguson and new members like McGowan, met in secret using books as code. Employing pre-decided text like The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, they would use page, line, and word numbers to disseminate messages across the group to determine gathering times and locations. This code was later used by the FBI as a means to paint the cell as a cult, describing these meetings as the book club, with figures like Avalon and Ferguson as leaders.
We have these little sessions, these skill shares, and the government called it book club, but nobody called it that.
It was at these skill shares and discussion circles that Ferguson, Avalon, McGowan, and others set their sights on Superior Lumber. Superior Lumber was one of the hundreds of Pacific Northwest logging companies that were chopping down some of the last remaining ancient forests.
We picked this place for its unspectacular nature.
Like many of the other timber companies operating in this area, Superior Lumber had been in and out of courts trying to get the green light to chop down trees in protected areas. Finally, on December 29, 2000, the Seattle District Judge okayed the sale and extraction of a patch of forest on Bureau of Land Management land that had been previously halted for failure to follow environmental regulations. So, the ELF got to work planning. And on the second day of 2001, they struck. McGowan sits in the back of a van dressed all in black, with another new ELF member, Suzanne Savoy. It's past midnight on January 2nd, and McGowan's palms are coated in sweat. He's racked with anxiety as the group drives through the pitch-black forest towards the Superior Lumber offices in Glendale, Oregon. In the front sit Jacob Ferguson, Kevin Tubbs, and another ELF member, Stan Meyerhoff. They arrive at the site in the dead of night. McGowan is the first one out. He hops out of the van and holes up in a ditch nearby with a good view of the target. He's lookout number 1. With McGowan in place with a two-way radio in hand, the other 5 make their way to the second lookout location south of the offices. Savoy gets out of the back seat and positions herself in a phone booth, ready with her radio to alert the team if anything seems odd. Right now, the coast is clear. The final 3 quickly make their way to the building and get to work. They nestle 2 5-gallon buckets full of gasoline and diesel along the east wall of the building that abuts the parking lot, then make their way around the building to the west side. There, under the electric meter, they plant 3 more buckets of fuel, set electric timers, jump back into the van, and drive away. By the time they scoop up McGowan and Savoy, only 15 minutes had passed. At 2:29 a.m., the police scanner in the van pings with activity. The blaze had begun, and thanks to the position of the fuel along the walls, the flames reached the attic before setting off the alarms. The entire roof was on fire before anyone was notified. The next day, Steve Swanson, the president of Superior Lumber, walked through the remains of his offices. It was clear the ELF had succeeded. The heat was apparently so extreme that computer monitors and lights melted. Years of files and documents turned to ash overnight. Over $1 million in damages. In the aftermath, an email landed in Craig Rosebraugh's inbox. Signed by the Earth Liberation Front, the first 4 words read, "We torched Superior Lumber." It seemed that the fire at Superior Lumber was a call to action, as the communique signs off with, "This year we hope to see an escalation in tactics against capitalism and industry. While Superior Lumber says, make a few items, do it better than anyone else, we say choose an earth raper and destroy them." And the call was heeded all over the country. 2001 would be a busy year of property destruction for the Earth Liberation Front. While McGowan was battling in the streets of Seattle and the Pacific Northwest ELF cell grew, others were taking action in the name of the Earth Liberation Front. across the country. The flames of the ELF and its ideology sparked fires of resistance that licked at the heels of other industries spreading capitalist decay. At Michigan State University, the ELF set fire to the offices of Catherine Ives, a GMO researcher linked to Monsanto funding. Years of research turned into fuel for a raging inferno, causing $1 million in damages. In the Midwest, another ELF cell set its sights on urban sprawl, burning down a partially built luxury home, encroaching on the Lake Monroe watershed in Indiana. A few months later, in Minnesota, the ELF deals $500,000 in damages to excavation equipment constructing the Highway 55 reroute. Again, in Indiana, a series of acts of sabotage from April to September target logging and excavation equipment, and even a Republican Party office building. With the diversity of ELF cells came a diversity of goals. While the Pacific Northwest cell had focused on forest and wildlife protection up until this point, other cells sought to strike back against globalization, GMOs, and capitalist destruction. But it was an ELF cell's fight against luxury condominiums and urban sprawl on Long Island that would burn the hottest. There, an ELF cell would form and hit hard and fast, waging what they called an unbounded war on urban sprawl from July of 2000 to January of 2001. The cell's first target was a group of condos in the midst of construction that they called future dens of the wealthy elite. To test the waters, the Long Island ELF cell spray painted and smashed hundreds of windows at construction sites throughout the fall of 2000. But it soon became clear that this was just the prelude to the main act. It's the night of December 9th, 2000, and the half-built houses at the Spring Lake development in Middle Island, Long Island, are about to burn. 4 figures sneak across the construction site, checking to make sure no one is in the buildings while they place DIY incendiary devices along 4 rows of condominiums. That night, 16 homes felt the kiss of flames. One structure completely burnt to the ground, while 3 others were heavily charred. In the aftermath, the group sent a communique claiming that window breaking and disabling vehicles can only do so much, and in the battle with our Earth in the balance, we cannot hold back or go soft on those pillaging the planet for profit. The Long Island cell had decided to escalate, but they were far from finished. 10 days later, they burned down the construction site of another luxury home at Miller Place. Then 10 more days later, they hit a third target, this time at the Island Estates in Mount Sinai on Long Island. 4 more luxury homes under construction were reduced to ashes. December 2000 marked a crushing blow to the profits of the condo developers of Long Island. Over the course of 5 months, the Long Island ELF cell took 11 major actions against urban sprawl, marking one of the most active periods for the Earth Liberation Front on record and dealing millions of dollars in damages. But like any flame that burns bright, the actions quickly died out. The cell was dismantled as their security culture failed. One member boasted to his friends about the fires, and the cops got wind, and he was caught. In the interrogation room, he folded and snitched on the rest of the cell, leading to the capture of the other 3 members. The cops had finally managed to take down an ELF cell, and those arrests foreshadowed a coming storm. Back in Eugene, Daniel McGowan finally found a chance to strike at the GMO industry that he had long struggled against. This, however, would be the last action he would ever take under the ideological banner of the ELF. But he would certainly go out with a bang. The plan was to hit 2 places at once, dealing a devastating blow to genetic modification research. It's May 21st, 2001. 10 members of the ELF cell are on the road to their targets. With Savoy behind the wheel, McGowan, Stan Meyerhoff, and 2 others drive towards Jefferson Poplar Farm, a research center for genetically modified poplar trees in Clascony, Oregon. Adrenaline building, the group desperately hoped that they wouldn't get stopped by cops driving through the small town of Clascony because in the trunk lay the makings of firebombs. They make it through the town fine, and they pull up to the site. While one of them jumps out to be the lookout, 3 others, including McGowan, lug several 5-gallon buckets up to the walls of the 2 buildings, set electrical timers, and get to work on a line of trucks. Under each truck, McGowan places a tray full to the brim with gasoline. Then he runs a fuel-soaked rag between each tray to make sure each one will catch. All is ready for the match, and McGowan is soaked to the bone in gasoline. So far, no one has seen them at work. It's radio silence from the lookout. McGowan strikes the match, and the farm goes up in flames. Hundreds of miles away at the University of Washington, Avalon and 4 other members of the cell set their own incendiary devices in the offices of GMO researcher Toby Bradshaw.
Toby Bradshaw is working to develop a fast-growing poplar tree for the paper industry.
The electrical timers spark, and flames roar to life in Washington and Oregon.
A radical environmental group claims it started the fire that severely damaged part of an Oregon tree farm and the fire that damaged part of the University of Washington.
In just that one night, the ELF did $3.5 million in damages across 2 states.
It reduced to ashes the labs and offices of 50 people.
Not far away, and at about the same time, 2 buildings on an Oregon tree farm were also destroyed.
In the aftermath, however, new information came to light. The group had acted on bad intel. It turned out that the Jefferson Poplar Farm wasn't growing genetically modified trees. They were using tried and true grafting methods that had been around for centuries. The ELF had burnt it down for nothing. This was a crushing blow to McGowan.
So it left me with a really bad taste in my mouth.
Combined with a growing internal debate of whether to escalate tactics even further or pull back, the cell was on the precipice of disbanding. McGowan himself was feeling disillusioned.
Like, wow, look at this huge, intense action, and look what happened in Washington. I'm like, am I really ready for this? Like, this is super serious and super big.
From the outside looking in, however, the fervor of activity on the East Coast, the Midwest, and the Pacific Northwest seemed to reveal that the Earth Liberation Front was building momentum in the revolutionary struggle against capitalist destruction. Little did the public know, however, that that momentum would soon be dashed. Cracks were growing. The group was on the precipice and would soon splinter. Betrayal was on the horizon, and lurking in the shadows were agents of the state. Soon, everything would change. McGowan, Avalon, and Country Girl would find themselves behind bars, and their capture would come from a betrayal within the cell itself.
Terrorism is terrorism, no matter what the motive.
State overreach.
They found the weak people. They found the people they could push.
And industrial scheming. This is the hunt for the Earth Liberation Front. If you want to watch the second part of this series right now and learn the fate of the Earth Liberation Front cell and the federal government's almost decade-long hunt for the Eco-Saboteurs, it's available right now, ad-free, and a month early when you become an OCC Patreon supporter. As I explained in the beginning of the video, the channel is in a financial downturn. So when you become a Patreon supporter, not only will you be able to watch the next part of this series right now, but becoming an OCC Patreon supporter means you'll help keep high-quality, non-AI slop videos like this one free and accessible to everyone. So please consider supporting Our Changing Climate on Patreon if you have the means. And if you can't spare the $3 or $6 a month right now, absolutely no worries. Just liking, commenting below, or even sharing this video with a friend is more than enough to bring this video to new audiences. If you've stuck around this far, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end and for your endless support. And I'll see you next month to learn about the hunt for the Earth Liberation Front.